one goal in mind: pull off the best show possible.
Well, Marty, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm super excited to speak to you. And so, yeah, I think I'm just going to dive right in. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Displayit does and who you guys serve?
Yeah, so Displayit's been around for 25 years, and we focus on experiential marketing events. And so whether you're the small business mom and pop that is going to a trade show for the first time with a low budget, or you're a corporation who has a larger marketing budget who's going to a large trade show, we can serve all assets of the trade show industry. And so we focus on making sure that we give you the tools necessary to drive better business results. When you invest in a trade show, when you invest in that exhibit, you're trying to get something out of it. And we help you deliver those results. What makes us a little unique in the industry is that we're vertically integrated. So Displayit owns the inventory. We have a print shop in-house. We cut, we sew, we test it, everything before it goes out, so that we make sure that we put our QC mark on it before it ships to you. And we do that to everything, no matter how big or how small the job is, just to make sure that the final touches are perfect for your product.
Yeah, and that's invaluable. So yeah, because trade shows can get very stressful, and there's so many moving parts. So you taking care of everything is definitely a load off. So just so that it's a little bit more useful for our audience, in terms of advice, how would you advise marketers who are organizing a trade show to plan, and just what's the mindset, like high level, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so planning for a trade show is no easy task. It takes time and energy. And so the minute you know that you're going to be going to a trade show is a really good time to start that planning process. I equate a trade show to building a mini house for a few days to throw a really large party. And there's so many different things that go into it, like the design. You need a certain level of permits. There's electrical, there's flooring, you got to put up walls, you got to put up artwork, there's food and beverage, there's entertainment, right? So all of these pieces come together to create the experience that you're trying to bring, because ultimately you want to attract attendees to your exhibit. And so the planning is really just the most important part. And don't underestimate the amount of planning that it takes to go into one of these. The smallest details that if you forget could be the difference between having a good show and having a great show.
So in terms of challenges you've seen people experience when they're planning a trade show, have you seen a recurring challenge that some of your customers have faced?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that we see is timing. And people are trying to squeeze a really large event in a small period of time to plan. And that's just really hard to do. It's really good to have at least a couple months to plan, ideally 3, because there's just so many different details that need to come together to pull this off. And so don't underestimate the time that it takes to pull off a successful event. When you start to look at all the different elements of designing the booth, designing the graphics, picking out all the accessories like furniture, flooring, any lighting, the quality assurance that you want to build into the process, advanced warehousing to the show so that it gets there early and on time, the installation. These are just some of the aspects of the holistic perspective that you need to take into consideration. And when you rush things, some things could happen that really, are not favorable. So timing is one of the big things. The other is budget. It's kind of really understanding what it takes to pull off a successful booth. There are solutions out there for every budget. So kind of understanding where you are realistically really helps set the stage of what solutions can be offered.
Does the timing vary depending on the booth size, or would you say across the board 3 months is enough? Like, are there any specificities depending on the size?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm going to kind of separate that into two buckets. One being, if you have a lower end budget and you're looking to purchase a portable display and take care of a lot of the details on your own, you can pull something off in a couple weeks, get it together, get some artwork, get it printed, get it to the show. And that's really your only option if you have a short time frame. If you want to do something larger, custom, that is maybe a turnkey where you're going to hire someone to to deliver it, install it, set it up. Then a couple months is like the minimum of what you need. And all our organizations have different time frames of what they like to work within. We prefer 3 months to do a custom exhibit so that we have enough time to dial in the custom aspects of the exhibit, make sure everything's perfect, all parties are on the same page, creating all the custom print templates, the graphic design. So yeah, a couple months, 2 to 3 months is ideal in our situation.
So in terms of budget, and I know this is going to vary depending on whether you are purchasing the stuff or if you're actually going for that turnkey solution, which is predominantly rental. Can you share with our audience a little bit sort of what sort of budget benchmark should you be looking at, rental versus purchase, and depending on the booth size as well?
Yeah, and so there's very subjective answers to this. However, if we break it up into the two categories of purchasing a portable display versus renting a turnkey solution, those are probably the easiest, to look at. For a 10 by 10 space or a 10 by 20 space, you can purchase a really good high quality graphic portable display for anywhere between $1,000 to $5,000, right? And I know that's a little bit of a wide range, but there's just so many variations of, do you want, what size do you want? What thickness? Do you want integrated lighting? Do you want any accessories to it? So that's a good range for a portable display. When you get into the turnkey solutions where you're hiring someone to install a frame and graphics and flooring, a 10 by 10 space, can start at $15,000. An average 20 by 20 space could be $25,000 to $35,000 all in. And that also does not include additional show services that you need to provide, that you need to purchase from the general contractor, such as any electrical, any drayage, any rigging, or internet packages. And so, the reality is that trade shows are not cheap to put on. And so that's why you want to make sure that you get the most out of it. And you're going to get out of the trade show what you put into it. So it could largely depend on the level of customability that you add to your design, but that's a good range, and it can go up. I mean, as you walk the trade show, you see some of the booths, cost several hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're quite elaborate. So there's really no ceiling.
I'm curious, because we had an incident where we were pitching the idea to one of our clients of, you buying a television versus renting the television, and renting the television was substantially more expensive than just buying it online, right? And so that was a bit of a shocker for our client. In terms of mix and match, can you rent some things and purchase other things? Like, is there like a middle ground?
Yeah, I think that's where there's definitely a middle ground. And, whether you're purchasing a portable or renting an exhibit or even purchasing an exhibit, it's a collaboration, right? And so you decide how much it is you want to bite off. And everyone's a little different. And it's kind of an a la carte approach, the way that we look at it. We would prefer to handle every detail, because when we manage a project, we know that we're in control of it, and we can do a better job planning all the different elements coming together. When you start mixing and matching, it can get a little more complicated, because let's just say you're renting an exhibit with graphics and you're going to take care of the flooring and the furniture. Well, that's great. Well, we're paying for labor to be there to install it. And if the flooring's not there on time, then who's paying the bill for the labor who was supposed to be starting to install it at 8 a.m. and the flooring didn't show up till noon? And so you may have saved $500 or $1,000 by getting the flooring on your own, but you ended up spending $1,500 in labor because you had 3 or 4 people standing around for 4 hours doing nothing. And there's things that are just out of your control. You don't really get to tell the show services when your booth gets delivered, or when the flooring gets delivered, or when they can bring the forklift in to hang the hanging sign. And so if you're trying to coordinate all of those elements individually, sometimes they just don't come together, and you end up spending more in the long run.
For those that have never done a trade show before, do you have any tips for them other than, planning in advance, having an allocated budget? Are there any other tips that you would tell them?
Yes, my biggest tip for individuals that have never even been to a trade show before is to seek out advice from someone who does have trade show experience. There's nothing like getting a firsthand take at what is involved in bringing a trade show exhibit to life. The setup and installation of a trade show is extremely complicated. There's a lot of moving parts. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's dirty. There's a lot going on. During the show, you're on your feet for 2, 3, or 4 days in a row. So it's very tiring. And then after the trade show's done, there's the dismantle of your booth and the wrap up of everything. And so getting that firsthand experience and getting someone to tell you about what the trade show is like is really helpful. And that may lead you down to a path of seeking out expert advice or expert help on bringing your trade show to life. There's just so many different aspects or so many different details that obviously planning is a large part of it, but you don't know what you don't know. So trying to get firsthand experience of what it's like is probably the biggest advice that I can give someone who's putting on a trade show, specifically if you've never done it before.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice, and it makes sense just from seeing passively, right, what it takes, all the moving parts. I think there's a lot of learning that can be, you can just learn a lot just from observing, right?
Absolutely.
In terms of rental versus buying, what are the pros and cons other than, you slightly touched on this, budget, right? The rental being the turnkey solution that will take care of everything versus buying is, DIY it, but then you have to take care of the logistics. Like, can you talk us through a little bit more as to what the pros and cons are for each?
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's talk about buying first, right? One of the major advantages of buying a booth is if you do multiple shows in the long run, you get to kind of spread that cost out, right? So even though maybe a large upfront investment of maybe $100,000 or $200,000, if you're doing multiple shows a year, then it'll pay for itself. And that's one of the biggest advantages of buying a booth. Kind of think of it as buying a car versus leasing a car, right? That after your payments are done after 3 or 5 years that you own it. So now some of the cons of buying are that you're stuck with that booth. So the design that you thought was cool 2 or 3 years ago is still the design that you have. The functionality you're looking for in a booth may have changed. You may realize that you need meeting rooms or that you need more wall space for messaging or graphics. You need to be responsible for maintaining the booth. Accidents happen. Do things get cracked or damaged or lost? And so the replacement cost of some of those components may end up getting pretty costly. And then you obviously have the storage and the logistics of it that are on your own. And so, just because you buy a booth, you still have a lot of additional responsibilities that come along with that. Renting is a completely different animal. It gives you flexibility to evolve. I think that, companies are evolving very quickly and they're changing. And I think your experiential marketing needs to change as well as you define and determine what is working and what's not working. If you, when you rent a booth, you have the ability to change it, and your messaging may change from show to show based on who the attendees are, which means new graphics. And so and after the show's over, you're done, right? So you may be exhausted. You can leave the show, get on your flight, go home, and leave it all behind you. And so renting is just one of those situations where, for those that are looking for a hands-off approach, it's probably a really good way to consider when it comes to trade show exhibits. What
do you recommend? Because a lot of our clients, they sign up to a trade show and they find the challenge of the venue having a preferred vendor. Do you have any tips or advice on how to navigate that?
Yeah, so a trade show general contractor who's putting on the show, they're going to have preferred vendors, and that is where you're going to pay for the convenience of it being right there. However, the downside may be you don't always get what you pay for. It's a very small industry and we all get along very well. It's there's just a ton of moving parts. When you're bringing the trade show exhibit to life at the show, there's really no teams. We're all in it at, trying to deliver the best experience for the client. I'll tell you that what we like to look at is, or the approach we take is, we're not the largest in the industry. And so if you have a preferred vendor on the show floor, they may be servicing hundreds of clients at that show. And you may just be a number, versus getting a more focused attention on your booth and the details that are truly important to you. So there's things that are in your control at a trade show, and there's things that are out of your control. And so identifying what those are is probably really important, of knowing where can you shop around and where do you need to use show services. If you need internet access at your booth, you're only going to get it from one place. You need electrical, that's going to come from one place. But there's other things like the flooring, the structure, the graphics, different elements of the show that you can shop around for and see who's going to give you the best value for what it is you're looking for.
Yeah, I think the big challenge that a lot of our clients have faced is really the venue is making a recommendation for a very specific vendor, and that vendor is extremely expensive. And so bringing on someone else, or shopping around and bringing someone else is quite complicated to get into the venue if it's not with that specific vendor. So what do you recommend in that scenario?
Yeah, and that's where if you're going to use a third party to try to bring an element together that is not from a preferred vendor, then you definitely want to make sure that you choose someone who has extensive experience working in the trade show industry. When you talk about the venues at the major trade show hubs, whether it be Las Vegas, Orlando, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, just to name a few, every venue has unique stipulations or different labor laws. And you need to have experience with those so that you can navigate them. And it's really hard for someone who's never dealt in one of those venues to know where they can bring in their own or where they need to use something that is provided from the show. And that's where you need to lean on a partner that kind of has that experience. And that's kind of the best advice I could give. And
so presumably there is also a sequence of things. So flooring needs to go before you put the furniture.
Yeah, exactly. And so 100%, right? And you can't put flooring down until the electrical cords are laid down, right? So it's electrical cords, it's flooring, it's the hanging sign, it's the structure, it's the graphics, then it's the maybe TV monitors, then it's maybe the rental furniture. And so, you've got to, there's a plan and there's a sequence of putting that together. And the more hands you have in the cookie jar, the more complicated it has potential to get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So in terms of metrics, is there any sort of new technology that people can leverage at trade shows to keep tabs on how many people they're getting, the visitors and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. So it's definitely out there, and we incorporate it actually into all of our exhibits. This is really exciting because one of the challenges that I think business owners or business leaders have with their trade show exhibits is, what was my return on the investment? How do I know that we had a good show or a bad show? And we think that it's been very subjective up until now. We can actually tell you how many people passed by your booth and did not walk in, right? We can report on how many people stopped inside your booth. How long did they stay? Did they leave and then come back, right? So if you can capture these metrics, what you can do is compare them to how many attendees actually visited the show, right? Which is resulting in a conversion, okay? And this conversion can help drive future decisions on what your investment is going to be. Is it the location of the booth? Well, if you don't want to be in a prime location because it's too expensive, what are you missing out on, right? Is it the size of the booth, right? Is it the type of booth you did? Did you not do that hanging sign because it was too expensive, but people couldn't find you? And so we use these metrics to measure the success of the booth so that we can drive better business results time and time again. So a lot of our clients we've been doing business with for years, and what we do is look at the metrics after the show and compare them to the previous ones so that we know that the decisions we're making in the booth design, in the graphic design, the booth locations are resulting in a better return. And so it's a really cool way to give the executives of an organization the information they need to justify the heavy expenses that are involved in a trade show.
And so based on that data, how do you determine, our location wasn't good, or perhaps the size of our booth wasn't large enough? Like, how do you go from data collection to actually knowing what needs to get changed the following year? Do you have any tips?
So that's where the details of the show and of the exhibit are extremely critical in trying to analyze this and figuring out what could we do better. And so we compile this data show after show, and we're creating trends, right? And so now we have conversion rates on what does a big LED monitor screen, attract? What does the height of a booth attract? Hanging signs, booth size, locations. And all of these different elements come together to create a story. Is it exact science? No, it's not. But you kind of have a pulse on things, and you notice trends. And when you see a conversion rate of a client go from 27% at one show to 35% at another show, that's a pretty significant increase of people. And it's just like, well, how did that happen? Well, what did we do differently? What changed? And so keeping detailed records on each of the exhibits, each of the shows, really is key in that, in drawing those conclusions. It's no different than any other statistical project that you work on. There's a level of subjectivity to it, but at the same time, that, hey, we had much better artwork or graphic design on this one, and our messaging was more clear. So people, instead of walking past our booth, they actually stopped and wanted to say hello and ask us about our product or service.
We talked about buying and renting. If people go the buying route and decide to DIY it, do you have any advice or tips regarding transportation and storage?
Yeah, so it's going to be hard to give tips on that because you're kind of on your own. And a lot of service companies, they don't have a warehouse. They don't have relationships with third-party logistics companies. So when you call to get your booth moved, you're going to be paying retail. And the storage is one of those it's one of those challenging problems to solve for, because if you buy your booth from somewhere, they may or may not have the capacity to store it. And so I would be very clear, if you're going to buy your booth from someone, will they store it for you? And what does that cost? Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And in terms of the venue itself, can the venue, are there rules in terms of times of entry, times of exit? Is there anything that people need to be aware of in that regard?
Oh, very good question. And yes, there are very strict rules on when you can enter. So the way that the trade show industry kind of works for installations is, they separate the trade show floor into different zones, and they allow only certain zones to set up at certain times. And they do that because you don't want an exhibit right at the front of the loading dock to be set up right away. So think of it as organizing the back of the closet first and then moving your way towards the front. And that is called a target date. And it's very important to know on your show details of when your target date is. It's specific to your booth location, because the last thing you want to do is schedule something to be delivered after the target date, or to schedule labor to install something before your target date, because both of those will result in excess costs that are out of your hands, and there's nothing you can do about it.
When you say excess costs, is there a fine, or they just won't let you build your booth?
Well, if you, for example, if you schedule labor to be show up at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning, but your target date is 8 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and you didn't know that, your labor is going to show up to install the booth, and there's going to be no booth to install because it has not been delivered by show services yet. So you're going to be paying for that labor to stand there and do nothing, unfortunately. And it's just one of those unfortunate situations that you didn't see coming because maybe you looked over an important element detail of the show services that's specific to your booth. So definitely I suggest reading through the show service details, every word from cover to cover, to ensure that you highlight and document every important detail.
And in terms for those, again, that are DIYing and that decide to go the purchasing route, where do they find labor? Does it have to be specific? Do they have to have a license? Where do you find these people?
Right. So I think if you're going to do the DIY, you're most likely capable of even doing it yourself. Most portable displays, you should be able to put up yourself in 1 to 2 hours if you have 1 or 2, 3 people helping you. If you have something that's a little more complicated, I'm pretty sure that show services will provide you labor if you request it. But there's
still an additional cost, presumably, right?
Cost. Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, Marty. Well, do you have any other final thoughts? Any advice?
Yeah, I think the last thing that I'll say is that trade shows are not cut and dry. They're not simple. Anything and everything can go wrong at a trade show, right? We've experienced so many unforeseen circumstances at trade shows. However, that being said, the trade show industry is full of wonderful people. Whether it's our suppliers, whether it's the competitors, when we're on the show floor setting up, we all have one goal in mind, and that is to pull off the best show possible for all of the attendees and the exhibitors. And so it's really cool seeing a show come together, because when the lights turn on and the aisle carpets rolled out, it is almost magical compared to what it looked like 12 hours before that time. And so plan for the unthinkable to happen. You need to have a contingency built in when you're planning for your trade show. I know there's certain elements that you can't plan for, but things can and will go wrong. And that's okay. It happens to everyone. And so, what I'll say is, from Displayit's perspective, is when things do go wrong, we will go out of our way to make things right as quickly as possible, because that's just the reality of it. Things are gonna mess up. It's a really cool industry. It's great people. It's thriving now, and it's glad to be back to where we are post COVID. So it's just one of those things where you can't plan enough to pull off the event. No detail is too small when it comes to trade shows.
Marty, thank you so much for all of your wisdom. It's been a pleasure.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for chatting with me today. I enjoyed it. We look forward to many more of these conversations. We look forward to working with each other and helping each other out, because that's really what it's all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.